Zok the Hidden Gemara. Omar Abzir. Omar Abzir, Amr Shmuel. Libain Sakin Vishachat. What if somebody heated up a knife? It's very hot. It's red, glowing red hot, and he shechted it with a hot knife. What would be the problem? Zok Gemara Shitasa Kshera. Why would there be a problem? Zok Rashi on the second line, V'loy Omar Sreifa Hizu V'loy Shchita. Maybe you burnt the simonim open. You didn't cut him open. Zok the Gemara, no, you cut him open because Chiduda Koidem Lilibuna. So Rashi, the cut Maktim Umamar Lachtoich Koidem Shetichva Habehem Minaor. The simon is cut before it gets burnt. Frekt Gemara Va'ikat Staten. As you're slicing through the neck, before you've completed the shchita, the sides of the knife are pressing against the neck on either side. Zok Rashi, but you could start the sakin, the sides of the knife. It's inside the cut. Before roiv the simon is cut, it's burning the area around it. Why is that a problem? He said, "Ravis as hasimonim, it burns the simonim. It's burning the veshet. It's burning the kana. The nimtze sheinisrif, come to choice. They're burnt koidim shchita before the gemar shchita. Sharei veshet nekivasei b'mashahu litareif. The the food pipe, even with that tiny pinprick, it becomes treifa usreifik a nekavu. And if you burn it, it's like there's a nekav." Now, this is a very fascinating thing because think about it. If you're cutting a neck, so the part that got burnt was cut already, right? Because if the sides of the veshet are grabbing a knife, the point of the blade, you're already past that point. I understand that. But could nikav veshet, when it's cut, the shchita part is not nikav veshet. It's because if it gets burned further, it's nikav veshet, even in the place where it's cut already. Zok Toisvis. Already near where it's cut already anyway, treif of that will be treifa. I think it's a huge chiddush. The halcha have a boy lemeisem mishum stoden ilav mishum mirvachravach, which is the Gemara's answer.
Because it's cut, it's shechted. It's not. Cutting is not shechita.
Maskim, but why isn't the shechita up until the roiv point? That should be nika v'veshet, because the veshet is cut, yet it's not shechted yet.
Shechita is not a nekav.
Because I understand, but there's a hole right near it. Why is that worse than the whole slicing? But it is vice versa. Zok the Gemara, you know why? Because base shechita mirvach ravach. When you cut it, it pulls open. So therefore, only the tip of the knife really comes in contact. The sides of the knife don't come in contact. As Rashi says, "Misrachi v'chatach mitzide asakin mikan mikan," and therefore, the conversations pull apart. They pull apart. It's like they're stretched. When you cut them, they pull apart. Therefore, you're not burning at all. Okay. Zok to Gemara. Iboilu. Let's clear as Ashayla. Libein shpud. What if I took a spit of steel and I made it boiling hot? So sides boiling hot and sides a stick. The hikaboy, and you hit it. Now there's a halacha. There's two types of negoyim that are mentioned in Parshas Tazria. One is a nega that grew in the place where a shchin was healing, and the shchin comes if someone hits you very hard with a stick, that creates a bruise, and in that area, if that area should grow a nega, that's the nega shchin. There's also called a nega michva. If you burn your hand, let's say you touch a very hot metal tool and it burns your hand, and on that burn area, it develops a nega, that's michva. Now the halachas of nega shchin and the halacha of nega michva are identical. Whatever simon makes it tamei, and muchlat for shchin makes it tamei by michve. Now shchin, why does it clap make the skin discolor and cause a little bit of a wound, because the heat that's generated at that moment of the contact, that's heat. So the question here is, what if I took a very hot spit and I hit you with it? So there's two reasons why it's going to cause some type of bruise. Sai because of the heat, and sai because of the hit. So Zog the Gemara, Libein Shvud v'hikaboy mishum shchin nidain or mishum michva nidain. So you're going to ask me, Lamahin Afkamina, what's the difference? They both have exactly the same halacha, and they have a unique halacha. The halacha is that if there is no hair in it, if there's a white hair in it, it's tummy right away before you wait 7 days. If there's no hair in it, if there's no white hair in it, then you lock him up 7 days. If it doesn't spread, he's tahar ganzen. If it does spread, he's tummy. Unlike a regular nega, we have to lock him up again and again. Here you lock him up once, and if it spreads, he's tummy. If it doesn't spread, even though it's still there, he walks free. So they have both the same halacha. So vasamir nafkamina, if it's a shchin or if it's a mikveh. The teretz is the l'chidetanya because of a shchidish we learned in the following brisa. Shchin u'mikveh are both metamin b'shavua echad. They both only have 1 week of wait time at the maximum, and b'shnei simonim, there's 2 simonim that are metamin. Either b'sar loven, if they have a white hair, they're tameh, u'b'pisayin, or if they spread. So, frag the Gemara, if they have exactly identical, the same halachas, why is there actually a separate parsha in the Torah going through the halachas of shchin, and then another parsha in the Torah identical, but it's repeated l'gabe mikveh? To teach you, loymar she'ein mitzdarfen zemzeh. What if I have a half a gris of a nega of a shchin, and I have half a gris of a nega of a mikveh that are side by side? The guy's tahor, because he doesn't have a full gris of either a nega on the shchin or a full gris of a nega on the mikveh. The Tanya we learned, Eizeu shchin veizeu mikveh. What is shchin and mikveh? Loka be'etz be'even be'gefes. B'chamei tveru b'chol dover shloiba machmasa'or. If you're hit with anything, even something that's hot, but the heat is not generated from fire, rather the heat is generated from some other natural cause. Lasuye ever meikarai, including the source of where they mine lead from, and I looked it up on the internet, and in fact, in a lead mine, it's very, very hot, and it's like hot you could burn yourself. So they actually have to, when they're mining lead, they actually have to have very big, powerful air conditioning systems there when they mine lead, because the source, when lead is reached at the source, it's very hot. Zeu shchin, that's shchin, because the heat's generated not from fire. Vezeu michveh, and what is a michveh? It's nichveh begachelas, with a coal that came from fire, of course. Beremetz, with the ash, the very hot ash. Besid reseach, which obviously was heated up in fire. Begavsis reseach, which is also heated up in fire. Uvechal dover haba machma sa'or lasuye chameya'or, hot water that was heated up by fire. Zuhi michveh. This is a michveh. Utanya, we learned shchin u'michveh. What happens if you have shchin and you have michveh in the same place? So is it a shchin or is it a michveh? Zok to Brisa, whichever came last. Im shchin koydem lemichveh. If the shchin came first, then we consider it a michveh. Then batal michveh is a shchin. The michveh is mevatel the shchin, and it's called a michveh. V'im michveh koydem is l'shchin, then batal shchin is a michveh. So where's my child again? Either way, they have the same halacha. The nafkamina is going to have a bechatzi gris shchin meikara. First, there was a half a gris of shchin. That's not tummy. It's not a shear. But right beside it, v'liben shvud v'hikaboy. You took a shvud, you made it very hot, you hit with it. V'nafak bei chatzi gris acher. Now, in that wound, a chatzi gris of nega came. The question is, that chatzi gris, the second chatzi gris, is that called a nega shchin or a nega mikveh? If the mikveh came first, if the burn comes before the clap, then it's a shchin, and it'll be tummy. But if the mikveh came first, if the shchin came first, and then the mikveh, Meaning, if the klap came first and then the heat, then it's called a mikveh. There won't be mitzaref with the other half a nega that shchin. So therefore, my chavata koidem v'asa havla mavata leila chavata v'avalei shchinu mikveh. Now the second one is mikveh because the heat comes later, right? The first one was shchin. If you have a half a grish of shchin and a half a grish of mikveh, v'loy mitzaref, then it won't be tamei. Dilma, when he hit him with a very hot stick, it was hevla kadim. First the fire came, then v'asi chavata, and then the clap comes. Umavatle the havla, kum techayis, it's a shchin. Now you have two half agrises that are both of shchin. V'avle shchinu shchinu mitzaref. That is the Gemara Shaila. Because it was all relevant to our questions, what comes first? When you get hit with something very hot, do we look at it like the burn came first and then the clap, or vice versa? I just want to stop for a second because we have a very interesting Tosfos, because our Brisa clearly says that anything that became hot, not because of fire, but from some other natural means, like chamitferia, would not be considered a mikveh, right? It won't be considered a burn. So what does Tosfos asks? Afilu Rabbi Yosy the Chashav Leibe Perakira told us or Mishum the Michlafa Apischa de Gehenim Chamet Tveria, which our Brisa does not consider to be a mikveh, it considers it to be a shchin. But Rabbi Yosy says if you cooked in such water, you chayiv al bishul. So that has to come from fire. It doesn't come from a regular fire. It's coming from Pischa Deganim. Zog Tosfos a massive chiddush. Shema kan hayamoida the nidem mishum shchin v'lo mishum michva kivin the or b'dei shemayim, because the or is b'dei shemayim. Oh, oops! I jumped a bit. That wasn't what I was referring to. I apologize. I was referring to the next Tosfos, but we didn't even get up to the next Gemara for the next Tosfos. I got too excited too quickly. Okay, so that is a shaila. When you clap somebody with a hot stick, what comes first? The beating, which leads to a shchin, or the fire, the heat, which leads to a mikvah, and being that the last thing that occurred is what remains, is this a nega shchin or is it a nega mikvah? What's an ageya if there was a half a shear that's been mitzaref to a previous half a shear of shchin or mikveh? Hashma, Damar B'Zer Amar Shmuel, Liben Sakin v'Shachat. What if you made liben on a sakin and you shechted with it, which is how we started the Gemara today? The halacha is chitase chshera. Why? Because we said chiduda kadem libuna. So the makkah comes before the fire. So if the makkah comes before the fire, this should be a mikveh. Al machavata kadem, and therefore we look at it like a mikveh because that came second. So you have a raya to the shaila. Zaktamar, you don't have a raya. Chidud shiny. If you're talking about a blade, yes, the tip of the blade, which doesn't get hot, it's very thin. That cuts before the side of the blade burns. But if you hit somebody with a rod of steel, there the heat comes simultaneously with the bang, and we don't know what's considered having come first, so we cannot be posher our shaila by negoyim. Zaktamar Tashma. Let's try another raya. Libein shpud v'hikaboy. That's exactly our shaila, right? Nidoin mishum michvaseish. It's called michvaseish, meaning the hit came first and the burn came second. Al machavata kadem. So there's no raya. Hasam nami de barzaya mivers. Daini chidud. Who said you hit him with the side of a rod? Maybe that's speaking where you sharpened the rod like a pencil point and you poked him with it. So there, everybody agrees that the chidu, the sharpness, comes first, just like with the chalaf of a knife, and only then the burn comes second. So therefore, forget it. Yeah, they're the chavat that came first, and it's nida mishum michvaseish. So therefore, you don't have a raya. Okay, gewalt. Zog to Gemara weiter. Omer Rav Nachman, Omer Rabba Baravua. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba Baravua, Sakin shel avodas kacham. You have a sakin that has Isser baked into it, because it's the sakin of avodah zarah or of a goy who had tarfus. The halach is muter lishchot ba. You're allowed to. No, this is. No, I apologize. I messed this up. I'm sorry. Sakin shel avodah tzkachavim. We're assuming we're not talking about the belias now. We're not talking about the shamnunas of Isser now. We're talking just because the knife is osir b'hadno, because it's a knife of avodah zarah. Muter lishchot ba. You're allowed to shecht with it. Are you having enough from it? But also lachtach b'bosar, but you're not allowed to use it to cut up meat. Muter lishchot ba. You know why? Because mekalkalu. He's being mekalkal. Why is it being mekalkal? Why is shechting being mekalkal? So zokt Rashi, because a live animal is more valuable than a dead animal. Zokt Rashi mekalkalu vein zoano shebechaya hayu dameh merubin mila achashchita. An animal is worth more alive than it is dead. Shebechaya hi aymedes legimel dvarim. There's three things you can use an animal for while it's alive. Legadav ladosh, to breed, ulecharisha, and to plow, ulachila, and to eat. But once you shecht it, you've limited its value only to its food value. So therefore, it's mekalkal, it's not considered having hana from avodah zarah. But for also lachtach b'bosar, because lagabirat mesakin, and once the animal's dead, it's a tikkun to cut it up into its proper cuts. Gewaltig. Let's see Tosfos. Mutter lishchot ba mekalkalu. For Tosfos afal gav de besoif perik elu devarim b'psachim mechayiv l'inyin Shabbos gabe shechet b'Shabbos b'chutz avodah kechovim mishum tikkun kol dehu the tikkun la'itzi midei ever minachai. If you shechel on Shabbos, it's a malacha. You know why it's a malacha? It's mekalkal, because you're fixing it. You're taking away their sever minachai. So how come over here you could have enough of avodah zarah? It's misakin. It's taking away Eber Minachai. So this is a fascinating halacha. Shiny Shabbos the Meleches Machsheves Asa Torah. By Shabbos there's an Isra of Meleches Machsheves, and this is what I wanted to do. The Chimin Sheyesh Tikun Purta Choshev Meleches Machsheves Shalakach Nischaven. That's what he wanted. Afal Pishek El Kula Yeser Al Tikunai. Even though technically he's causing more damage, but that's what he wanted to accomplish. He fulfilled what he wanted to accomplish, and that's what you look at. That's the criteria for Shabbos. But if you look at the big picture, is he nehena? We always use meleches machsheves osra Torah as a kula by Shabbos. If you weren't planning to do something and it happened, you're not chayiv. Why? Because meleches machsheves osra Torah. We're used to using the concept of meleches machsheves osra Torah as a kula in Hilchos Shabbos. Here you see meleches machsheves osra Torah could even be a chumer in Shabbos. You look at his intent. If this is his intent, and that's what he accomplished, it'll be also mishum Shabbos. But it's still not called nehena because the Lemaisa he's making the animal worthless. Now there's a lot of Torah on this because once I want to kill it, then it is a misakin, or more than that. Once I cut roiv simin, now it's going to be a treifa if I don't finish. So that last bit for sure I'm nehena. So there's a lot of Torah on this shtickle. But we're learning the Pashut Pshat with Rashi. It's makalkal because at the end of the day, he's bringing down the value of this animal. Sometimes even shechting would be aser. You know where? We're having an awe. Where are you having an awe? B'misukemes. If this animal is going to die soon, so the other values that it has for breeding and for working the field, for plowing, that's not here anymore. If you don't shecht it, it's going to die and it'll be useless. So there, you're definitely having a no from avodah zarah b'shkitasa, and therefore it'll be aser. No. The value of the animal goes down. Zogt gemor umechatech mutter. Sometimes mechatech is a mutter. You know where? Ba'atmi de kaimen lekorbana. What if you have a big cut of meat that's very, very choshev? You would put it out if a king or an officer came to visit you, right? And by cutting it into smaller pieces, it loses its value. Let's say you have a standing rib roast, and you cut it into 10 pieces, you've destroyed its value. So there it would be mutter even with a knife of avodah zarah because you're destroying value, you're not having enough. Frag the Gemara, so you've dealt with Isurei and all. But what about the blias of Isur? The typically mishum shamnunis the Isura. If you're going to shecht an animal with a treif and a knife, so what about the Isur, the blias of Isur that's going to go into the walls of the animal? Zok to Gemara, that's not a problem because we're discussing a case where that wouldn't be relevant. Bichadasha. We're talking about it was a brand new knife. Frek Gemara was if a brand new knife, then how is it also because of Avodah Zarah? You never used it yet. Chadasha, Bein Rabbi Shmuel, Bein Rabbi Kiva. They have a machlokes by Avodah Zarah mamish. If I designate this getchka to Avodah Zarah, but I didn't serve it yet, does the getchka become Avodah Zarah? There's a machlokes. But kula alma moida, if I dedicate a tool to be used in the service of Avodah Zarah, that dedication has no impact until I actually use it for Avodah Zarah. So Bein Rabbi Shmuel, Ubein Rabbi Kiva, where they have a machlokes by Avodah Zarah gufa if it has to be used. But this is only misham she'avodas kechavim pain. Umisham she'avodas kechavim einon isurin einon asurin at sheyavdu. So if you tell me it's a chadasha, so there's no Isra no either. Zok the Gemara, Iba Yisema, the pasuk ba gavzal avodas kechavim. Sure, you used it, but you used it to chop wood with. So therefore, it doesn't have any blias of Isra. So that's why that wasn't relevant to our Shiloh. But Viba Yisema, B'Yishana, it was an old knife, but Shalivna Ba'ar, but you made libun, meaning you kasher the knife. If you kasher the knife, it doesn't have any bluyus of Isser. Now this gets into a whole new shaila if you have to make libun on such a knife. So Tosfos gets into a whole discussion over here. Vosab is libun, what's wrong with Hagolah? What's wrong with Hagolah? So Tosfos offers a couple of terutzim. And these are mamish the heart of Yeridea. It gets into Avodah Zarah. It gets into Yeridea. So Tosfos asks a kasha. We know there's a Gemara that says when it comes to Pesach, you can kasher your knives b'Hagolah. So I'm on the third wide line of Tosfos on Chesam and Aleph. V'aymer Rabbeinu Tam di yesh lachalik abi chometz mishum de terbola. When chometz was beilaya, was nibbling the knife, that was not on Pesach. That was before Pesach. So the chometz that went into the knife was heter. When the iser, when the belia in the knife went in the heter, there hagol is enough. The yesh lechalak abi chometz from shum de terabala the binyan zeh mechalak b'soik mesechas avodah zarah. You find a similar distinction that the Gemara in Avodah Zarah makes. Therefore, afagav the hashta beli havi isura. Even though right now on Pesach, those blias of chometz are isur. But we look at when it was absorbed in the knife, and when it was absorbed in the knife was heter. And therefore it'll come out with Hagolah. But Isurei Hanoah, Avodah Zarah, blias of that, blias of tarfus, that went into a knife, that went in, the Isur, therefore that would require libun. So that's a huge chiddush. This is also negeya. If it was belea milk and you cut fleishiks with it, Hagolah would be enough. Why? Because when it was belea milk, it was belea heter, right? So that's one thing which is a little bit interesting of a distinction because vosamir anaf kamina, if it was isser heter. Our question is, does the Hagolah take it out? If it takes it out, what's the difference if it was heter bola or isur bola? It comes out. But you see that according to the Rebbe Tam, there is such a distinction. Now Tosfos has another pshat. Another pshat. Maybe the maybe the knives that we're talking about here, the reason why they need libun is because they were used. They were used through a libun. They were used in a fire, and that's why you need it. But the Pesach knives are speaking by smaller knives that you wouldn't normally use in the fire. You use them to cut hot meat, and therefore Hagolah would be enough. Okay, so there's a whole shaila if you have to be worried about it, and then there's what if the knives are only occasionally used in the fire, but they're normally used with hot things? Would those need libun or would those need Hagolah? That's also a shaila as well. There's another interesting point that Tosfos makes that we're familiar with. that could be v'oid afilu isrami v'ishtamish boy al yidea, or even if you use the knife with fire, but you don't plan anymore to use it with fire, but it absorbed with fire, there would be sagi behagala. You know why? Because the chalmash soifil liflet ayidei roishkin pilot ba'agala rishayna. The svara, yes, a gullah will not get out all the blias that went into the knife through the fire. But what do I care? I made a gullah, whatever's going to come out through high heat, regular heat, without fire, came out now. So I can use it now for Reishkin. Zoktosh, that's not a good svara. Because by a cheres, we also say that happens. Why don't you say after the first gullah, no more will come out? There's just because it leaches, right? We say a little bit comes out each time. So too, Zoktosh, if the knife was Beleya Ayidei Libun, and now you only make Hagala, it doesn't get it all out, and there'll always be a little bit leaching out, that will answer. Okay, gewaltig. Zok to Gemara weiter. So the reason why there's no problem of the blias is because you had kasher the knife of avodah zarah before you used it, and now there's only a concern of isur henna. Zok to Gemara weiter. Itmar, we have a machlokes. Hashaychet besakin shel oivdei kachav. What if you shechted with a treifa knife? Rav Omer Kolev. Rav holds you have to slice, like whole cut slicer. You have to take a little layer off of the base of shchita, because the base of shchita on either side of the knife was boileya iser. For Rav Barbachana Amar Mediach, you just need to rinse it off. Let's say this is the machlokes. The Marasavar, there's like 5 different ways in the Rishonim to learn this Gemara, but we're learning the Pashas according to Rashi. The Marasavar base hashchita tzainin. There's actually a machlokes. Do we consider the knife, the neck, the slice of the animal, that meat on either side? Do we consider that chamen, which would now be baileya? So one man that holds base hashchita is tzainin. If it's tzainin, then it won't be baileya. You just have to rinse it off to take off any shamnunis that's on the surface. Umar suffer base hashchita reisach, and it'll be baileya kedei klipa. So therefore, you have to cut off a klipa on either side. Zok gemara loy. Maybe that's not the machlokes. The chula alma base hashchita reisechu. Let's say everybody else the base hashchita is reisach, and under normal conditions it would be baileya, and you'd have to be kailif. So therefore, man damar kailif shaper. He doesn't need an explanation. The base of shchita is reisach, it's going to be baileya from the knife. Uman damar mediach. The man damar holds mediach. It should be baileya. No. Here there's an exception. I did the treaty simonim lafukedam. Since the simonim are busy shooting out dam, loy boli, they won't be baileya. So even though you have a condition that could cause a belia, because it's considered reisach, the dam shooting out doesn't let it. It's like a one-way street. Now it's secreting, it's not absorbing. You find this halacha by meat. If you ever noticed when they salt meat, they don't just have one piece of meat on the rack. They'll pile up the meat, 10 layers high, right? And salt it. Why aren't you worried that the blood's going to come out of one, drain down, and go into the next? So the reason for that is, the Gemara tells us, is because when the meat is in the middle of being pilate, because it's salted, all the meat's now secreting blood, it's not going to absorb blood. So there is such a svara that while meat is giving out, it's rejecting, it's not going to absorb. Igodamri, the chula ala base hashchita tzainin. Maybe everybody else base hashchita tzainin, and therefore mandavar mediach shaper. Now the default would be mediach should be enough. So why should you be baileya? Mandamar kailev, because a new principle, agav duchka desakina bola. When you're putting pressure on something, you're cutting something, that's a duk, it's like sort of pushes it in. It will push it in. It's not just exposed to Isser, the Isser is being pushed into it. There's such a concept of duchka de sakina. When it comes to kashering, a knife is much more serious than a spoon or a fork, because something that you cut with, there's something called duchka de sakina. Zok to Gemara, what about a sakin treifa? Sakin treifa. So until now, we were talking about a sakin shel oivdei kachav. Now we want to know about a sakin that shechted a treifa. So this isn't a sakin that has absorbed Isser from being used many times before. Rather, it's merely you merely shechted a treifa with it. So now was this kosher a chalif by leah blias of treifa from the wall that it just cut? Now Tosfos mentions right away, or is it Tosfos? Tosfos mentions right away. It must be. No, it's not Tosfos. It's one of the other Rishonim. Mention right away. If you hold like what we said before, that the moment you cut it, it pulls apart. So then, what's the shaila? So this would have to be according to the Mount Omar that maybe it holds doesn't pull apart. So what happens if you shecht and the animal turned up being treifos, and now was the knife by Leah? Till now we're discussing will the meat be by Leah, right? If the knife already had bleeds of tarfus from previous use from a goy. Here we have a kosher knife. You shechted a treifa with it. Now we wonder if the knife becomes infected. Pligi bar Rabacha v'Ravina. Chad Omar b'chamin, you'd have to make hagola on the knife, on the chalif. The Chad Omar, no, you just need to rinse off the surface b'tzaynin. The hilchasa, and the halacha is afilu b'tzaynin. Now the question is, why should this be different than a meat? The teretz is Rashi, because a knife is steel. Meat is softer. Meat will absorb belias more quickly than steel would be. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says halacha l'maisa. Rashi's paskening. The gabisakin shall heter who the pasuk hilchos alatera. The lo itzer bebliyazu. Why? Because a knife is hard. The kasha hu levloya. It won't be belaya so fast. Ella al yedei resicha, only if it's cooking. Avol sakin the isura shloiv the kachavim that you used with heat many times for nevelas and treifas. That's where beplukted the that's where we have a machloikis before, if the meat needs klipa or if hadach is enough. And Zog to Rashi, that our Gemara is not paskening. Mipnei shasakin asura v'abasar rotz levloya. Rach levloya. It will be by leia faster. So we're going to see Rashi is going to pasken Allah l'maisa. It's a little bit later, Rashi. So Zog to Gemara. Here the Gemara is paskening that even b'tzayna will be enough. Oh, I'm sorry. It was earlier Rashi paskened. So Rashi is, even if you hold, everybody holds the base hashkitas tzaynin, it's not riseach. Could be this will be beleya agav duchka the sakina. Zok Rashi duchka the sakina shebishav shifay bebasar bedoichik. You're pushing it into the meat, therefore bola. Since this Gemara remained with the Machloikas and didn't tell us who the pascha like, and Visur Daraisi, this is a shayla of Daraisi, the blias of Nevelis and Treifas. Avdina lechumra, you pascha lechumra, the kaimelo mishal Torah holach achar hamachmer, you go back to the machmer, we call mokem lechatchila lo yishchait to ha-shochit kamer. Even if you could do klipa, don't check with a treifa knife and do klipa. Don't check with a treifa knife. If you shecht, the solution is to make klipa, but you shouldn't shecht with a treifa knife at all. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Fragt Gemara, you're clearing a shaila because I shechted an animal that's treifa, and now you have a discussion if the knife is baileya, and we paskin that the knife is not baileya, you just rinse it off. Zogt the Gemara, the ikabalisa the parcel of michpere. What if you have a rough type of cloth that you could scrub the knife with without rinsing it off? Loy tzarech, you don't even need to rinse it off. You can just wipe it off with an abrasive cloth. That'll take everything off. Zogt the Gemara ulaman omer bechamin. And what about the man that will hold? You have to rinse this knife out with hot water. You have to make hagola. My timer. Bishum de Kabbalah Isura. Why does he require that you make Hagala on this knife? Because when you shechted an animal that turned out being treifa, it was Beileya from the base Hashchita. And that's how it got bleach of treifa. Freak the Gemara, so then even if the animal wasn't a treifa, the Hetera Nami Bola, Ever Menachai. While it's cutting before the Shchita is complete, the animal is Ever Menachai. So how come every knife you don't have a problem that it was B'lei Ever Minachai? You should require Hagola between each Shchita, because while you were shechting, it was B'lei Ever Minachai. Zakt Gemara, Emas Bola. When is it being B'lei Ever Minachai? Lichi Chaima. when it gets warm, when the base hashchita heats up. At what point does the base hashchita get heated up? Not while you're shechting it. Lechigomer shchita, at the gemar shchita is first where the knife, where the base hashchita gets hot, and he shaita at that point it's not ever menachai anymore. So while it's going, cutting through the thing, it's coming into contact with ever menachai. There's not enough heat to be beleya. By the time you have enough heat to be beleya, it's not ever menachai anymore. So this also opens up a whole very interesting shaila, because the animal is still alive until the siman was cut, right? So that's why we want to call it Ever Minachai. The question is, can an animal that's still alive, I understand you're not allowed to eat it, but will it give off blias? It's much from the Gemara that will give off blias, right? So there was a shaila, I think it's Rabbi Kiveger, a live chicken fell into a big cooking pot of milk, and it came out. Chicken's alive, never died. Rabbi Kiveger says that pot of milk is asher bana, it's mamish a bishul of basar b'chalav, and you're not even allowed to give it to a guy, you're shalot a guy, it's asher bana, because basar b'chalav is asher bana. Because it was by life of the chicken, even though the chicken's alive. So he brought a raya from here that even though something's alive, it would give off blias of iser of Ever Minachai. Because otherwise, what's the shaila of Ever Minachai? It must be that Ever Menachai could give off blias, and the blias are also too. Interesting shaila. Hatabach tzarich. Actually, there's a famous story with the Baal Shem Tov, actually. Also with a dog that jumped into a big pot of fish, and they had to spill out the whole pot of fish, because not going to have blias of dog, it had blias of Ever Menachai. I mean, it had blias of dog too. But you see, even a live animal can give off blias. A butcher needs 3 knives. One that you shecht with. You never use a knife that you shecht with to chop up the meat. You're going to destroy the chalif. A chalif is very, very carefully maintained. Now you need one that you cut basar that's mutter to eat, and one that you're going to cut chelav with. Chelav is asher bana, right? Chelav is asher b'achila, with a chiv kares. So therefore, you shouldn't use the same knife that you cut chelav with to cut the meat. Yes, I'm asking you need the chalif. Let's not talk about that. But out of the 2 knives for the basar and the chelav, use only 1 knife. First use it to cut basar with. And then you cut chalavim. And for the next animal, you'll make the hagala. You kasher it in between. But for each time, you can just use 1 knife. Just cut the basar first, and then cut the chelav. Zaktamor, no, because you might get mixed up. Gzeira shema yachtor chalavim v'achach basar, and then you'll have a problem. If you're worried about getting mixed up, so how does 2 knives help you? You can mix up the knives. Hashanami michlaf lei, you'll mix up the knives. Zaktamor, no, even that's rechinu tray, since you need to have 2 knives, isle carrier, he'll probably label them chelav only, or basar only. He also needs 2 buckets of water. Achad shemediach by basar, one that he rinses off the meat in. The achad shemediach by chalavim, and the second bucket to rinse off the chelav. You can't rinse them both off at the same bucket. Frank the more the same question of a niska lechadav and nedich by basar, v'adu nedich by chalavim. Zaktimar, there's a problem. Gzeira shema yedich chalavim v'achad basar, you might get mixed up. Frank the more, if you have 2 things of water, you might mix up the tubs. Hashanami michlaf lilay. Zaktimar, even the tzarchin tarti, once you make them have 2, he'll label them. Isle hakera. Amar mem mishpeder papa loy lischayf inish kafli aliyah bisra. When you're salting them, don't, even when not you're salting them, when you're piling up the meat, don't pile up the kidneys on top of the meat. You know why? Because there's a lot of blood running out of those kidneys, and it's going to run into the meat. The dove tarba ubala bisra. Frank Gemara, if you're worried about blood leaving, or chaylev, it's not blood, it's chaylev. If you're worried about chaylev leaving the chaylev around the kidneys leaving and going into the meat, so even if it's not on top of it, even if it's on the same rack beside it, the chaylev is going to run into the meat. Doiv tarba ubala bisra. Karma mifsik mitasai. There is a membrane around the kidney that's going to contain the chaylev. So therefore, when they're lying side by side, there's not enough coming out that we need to be concerned. So, why don't you say, even if you pile it up, the kidney on top of the meat you should say the same thing. Karma ika, there is a membrane. Zakta Gemara, no, because I did the mash mishmayoda the tevcha. Once he's moving it around and piling it up, miftach, it will puncture the membrane, and it will allow the fat to penetrate the meat. But I guess if it's not piled on top, then you're not handling as much. It won't get penetrated, I guess. Okay, we'll stop here.
1 week already passed.